The trick is a fan, a clip-on desk fan between $8 and $20 pointed across the surface of your water rather than at your fish, and it will hold your aquarium between 4 and 7 degrees Fahrenheit below the temperature of the room it is standing in through the worst week of the summer for a few cents of electricity. The aquarium industry would prefer to sell you a chiller for between $200 and $600, but the fan is not actually the interesting part of this video. The interesting part is what heat is genuinely doing inside your tank, because it is not what most hobbyists think it is, and the standard summer advice you will find in every forum thread and on every shelf makes the real problem measurably worse. Here is the summer most people in this hobby have already lived through. The room gets warm in July, you glance at the thermometer and it reads 84 degrees instead of the 78 it read in April. You're not alarmed because the fish look fine. A week later they are sitting higher in the water than usual, and the ones that normally cruise the middle are hanging near the surface. The rasboras stop eating properly. One morning you find a fish dead with no marks on it and no visible symptoms of anything, and then 2 days later another one. You do a water change. You test the water and the readings look broadly normal. You put a frozen bottle of water in the tank, because that is the advice everybody gives, and the temperature drops 3 degrees in 40 minutes and climbs back up by evening. You do that every day for 2 weeks. By the time September arrives, you have lost 3 or 4 fish, you have blamed the heat, and you have moved on. And nothing about that story is a mystery. Every part of it is predictable, and the frozen bottle was making it worse rather than better. Put a number on that summer, and it is worse than most people assume. 3 or 4 lost fish is somewhere between $20 and $80 depending on what you keep, and if you lose a breeding pair or a centerpiece fish, it is considerably more than that. Add the medication you bought when the survivors developed something in August. Add the water conditioner you went through doing emergency changes. Add the 2 or 3 fish you bought in September to fill the gaps, which is money spent replacing animals that should still have been alive. For most hobbyists, that is between $60 and $150 a year, in losses that read as bad luck rather than as a cost, and it recurs every single summer. And it is the reason the $300 chiller starts to look reasonable by the 3rd year. And that is before you understand what the heat is actually doing inside the tank. Because the fish deaths are a symptom of something the thermometer does not measure. The summer temperature problem in this hobby is solved 2 ways, and both are worth understanding before you look at the actual fix. The first is the aquarium chiller, which is a genuine piece of engineering and the correct tool for a handful of specific setups. It is also a capital purchase between $200 and $600. For a standard freshwater tank, it consumes real electricity continuously, and because it is a heat pump, it dumps the heat it removes from your water directly into the room. Your tank is standing in, which makes the room warmer, which makes the chiller work harder. The second way it is sold is as a small consumable. Cooling gel packs, branded aquarium cooling fans, which are frequently the same commodity clip fan you can buy in a hardware store, with an aquarium logo printed on the housing and a price several times higher. Bottle treatments marketed for summer stress, which do nothing measurable about either heat or oxygen. The chiller is an expensive purchase that most freshwater tanks do not need. The consumables are a repeat purchase that solve nothing at all, and the free advice that fills the gap between them, which is to float bottles of ice, is the single most damaging thing you can do to a warm tank, for a reason that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the rate of change. That is not a scandal, and almost every consumer category on Earth does the same thing. What matters here is that between an expensive machine at one end and a useless bottle at the other, nobody at any point is explaining the mechanism, and the mechanism is the only thing that tells you what to actually do. Before I get into that mechanism, one thing worth saying now. Summer stability is one system in a tank that has several, and heat exposes every weakness in the others. A tank that is lightly stocked, well planted, and correctly filtered rides out a heat wave that kills fish in an overstocked tank 2 doors down. I have put the complete version together in one place as a full aquarium playbook, covering how every layer supports the others across the whole year. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment. And if the code is on your screen right now, you can scan it and go straight there. Now here is what is actually happening in a warm tank. And it is not that the fish are too hot. Fish are ectotherms, meaning their body temperature and their metabolic rate track the water around them. As water warms, their metabolism rises, and as a general rule, the metabolic rate of a fish roughly doubles across a 10 degrees Celsius increase. A fish in 86-degree water needs substantially more oxygen every minute than the same fish in 75-degree water. That is the demand side. Now the supply side, and this is the part almost nobody explains. The amount of oxygen that water can physically hold in solution falls as temperature rises. Fresh water at around 68 degrees Fahrenheit holds roughly 9 milligrams of dissolved oxygen per liter at saturation. The same water at 86 degrees holds closer to 7.5. That is close to 1/5 less oxygen available in the tank at exactly the moment every animal in it needs more. Your beneficial bacteria are aerobic too, and their respiration rate rises with temperature as well. So your filter is competing for the same shrinking supply. Heat does not cook your fish. Heat suffocates them slowly, while the water looks completely normal, and the thermometer reads a number that does not sound alarming. If you have ever watched your fish sit unusually high in the water in July, or hover near the filter outflow where the current is strongest, and assumed they were begging for food or being territorial, you have already seen this happen in front of you. That behavior has a name. It is called surface respiration, and a fish does it for exactly one reason, which is that the thin film of water at the very top of the tank is in direct contact with the air, and therefore holds more dissolved oxygen than the water below it. A fish hanging at the surface in warm weather is not waiting for you. It is at the only part of the tank where it can still breathe comfortably, and it is telling you the oxygen level in the rest of the water has dropped below what it needs. There is a second thing happening at the same time, and it is the reason a summer water test can look fine and still be dangerous. Total ammonia in water exists in two forms that shift back and forth depending on temperature and pH. One is ammonium, which is relatively harmless. The other is free ammonia, which is the toxic form that damages gills. Warm water pushes that balance toward the toxic form, and across a 10 degrees Celsius rise the free ammonia fraction, roughly doubles at the same pH. The number on your test kit has not changed. The proportion of it that is actually poisoning your fish has. Layer on top of that the fact that dissolved oxygen reaches its lowest point of the entire day in the hours just before your lights come on. Because through the night, your plants and your bacteria are respiring and consuming oxygen rather than producing it. And you have a specific, predictable window every single summer night when oxygen is at its minimum, demand is at its maximum, and ammonia is at its most toxic. That window is why fish deaths in summer are so often discovered first thing in the morning. That is the part that costs more than the price of a chiller. The hobbyist who loses fish across July almost never loses them to a number on a thermometer. They lose them to overnight oxygen depletion, and to the stress load of a body running at high metabolic cost with a suppressed immune response, which is also why summer is when latent infections surface, and a tank that was stable for a year suddenly has a disease outbreak. And because the thermometer reads 84 rather than something dramatic, and the water test reads normal, the conclusion drawn is that the species was delicate, or that the summer was unusually bad, or that it was simply bad luck. It was none of those. It was a tank running out of dissolved oxygen at 4 a.m. every night for 6 weeks. They were not doing anything wrong. Nobody told them what the mechanism was. Which brings us to the fan, and to why something this cheap outperforms something that costs 30 times as much for most freshwater tanks. A fan blowing across an open water surface produces evaporative cooling, and the physics involved is genuinely remarkable in scale. To cool 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius, you remove 1 calorie of heat. To evaporate that same 1 gram of water, you remove roughly 540 calories, because breaking water out of liquid form into vapor absorbs an enormous amount of energy. That energy comes out of the water left behind. Every molecule that leaves the surface as vapor takes a disproportionate quantity of heat with it. The only thing preventing this from happening continuously is the layer of saturated humid air that sits directly on the water surface, and moving air is what strips that layer away. That is the entire job of the fan. It is not cooling the water by blowing cold air at it. It is removing the humid boundary layer so that evaporation can keep running. The setup takes about 2 minutes. Clip a small fan to the rim of the tank or place it on a shelf beside it, and aim it so the airflow travels across the water surface, not down into it and not at the glass. The lid comes off or gets propped open because a sealed lid traps the humid layer, and evaporative cooling stops dead. Start on the lowest speed setting. A small fan on low across an open surface typically holds a tank between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius below room ambient, which is 4 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And it does that continuously without a single moving part inside the water. That is the core of it, and this is the point where the supporting changes matter more than the fan itself. A fan alone in an overstocked tank with a sealed lid and an 8-hour midday photo period will not save it. The full playbook covers the whole summer protocol in order, along with the stocking, filtration, and feeding decisions that determine whether a heat wave is an inconvenience or a loss. The link is in the description and the top pinned comment, or scan the code on your screen, and it will take you there directly. The fan handles temperature. Now you handle oxygen directly because temperature was never the real threat. Increase your surface agitation because gas exchange happens almost entirely at the surface film and nowhere else. The cheapest way to do that is an air pump running an air stone or a sponge filter, which costs between $8 and $20 and adds oxygen 24 hours a day. If you already run a hang-on back filter, raise the water level or lower the outflow so the return actually breaks the surface rather than sliding under it. If you run a canister, angle the spray bar upward to ripple the surface instead of across the tank. Then shift your lighting. Cut the photo period back to 6 hours during the hottest weeks, because aquarium lights, particularly older fixtures, put real heat into the water. Better still, move that photo period later so your lights run into the coolest hours of the night. That does two jobs at once. It keeps light and heat out of the hottest part of the day, and it puts your plants into oxygen production during the exact window when dissolved oxygen would otherwise be hitting its overnight minimum, then reduce feeding, cut back to a smaller single feeding, because every uneaten particle decomposing in warm water consumes oxygen and produces ammonia in the conditions where ammonia is at its most toxic. One detail inside all of that is worth stating on its own, because people get it wrong constantly. The air pump runs continuously, and above all, it runs overnight. Plenty of hobbyists put an air pump on the same timer as their lights or switch it off at bedtime because of the noise, and that puts the aeration on exactly the opposite schedule to the one the tank needs. The hours when your air pump matters most are the hours you are asleep, because that is the window when your plants and your bacteria are consuming oxygen instead of producing it. A heavily planted tank is not oxygen insurance at night. At night, it is another consumer. There is one piece of maintenance the fan creates, and you have to stay ahead of it. Evaporative cooling works by removing water, so you will lose water, typically somewhere between 1 and 3 gallons a week on a mid-sized tank. Running a fan continuously. Evaporation takes only the water. Every dissolved mineral and salt stays behind, which means your hardness and your total dissolved solids climb steadily as the level drops. Top off with dechlorinated water of the same type you normally use. Do it little and often rather than in one large addition, and mark the correct water line on the glass with a piece of tape so you are matching a line rather than guessing. If you keep sensitive shrimp or softwater species, this matters more than it does for a hardy community tank, because they respond to mineral creep long before anything else does. If you already own a chiller, none of this is wasted, and you should not stop using it. Run the fan alongside it, and the chiller will cycle far less often, which extends its life and cuts its running cost. And the surface agitation and photo period changes help regardless of how the water is being cooled. If your tank has a sealed lid, you cannot remove because you keep jumping species or you have cats. Fit a mesh screen top instead of glass. Mesh gives you almost all of the evaporation and gas exchange while still containing the fish. It costs very little, and it is the standard solution among people who keep known jumpers in warm rooms. I want to be straightforward about the limitations, because accurate information is worth more than a clean sales pitch. The first is humidity. Evaporative cooling depends on the surrounding air being able to accept more water vapor, so the drier the room, the better it performs. In a very humid room, or a humid climate, you may see closer to 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, rather than 4, and the fan will also raise the humidity of a small enclosed room, noticeably. The second is that there is a ceiling if ambient room temperature climbs into the mid-30s Celsius, which is the mid-90s Fahrenheit. A fan alone will not hold a safe temperature for cold water species like goldfish or white cloud mountain minnows, and it is not a substitute for a chiller on a dedicated cold water or marine reef system. Cool the room, not just the tank. The third is that this is a summer protocol and not a permanent configuration. Leave a fan running across a tank in winter and you will chase your heater in the opposite direction, wasting electricity and creating the temperature instability you were trying to avoid. Put the fan on a simple plug-in timer or an inexpensive temperature controller and put it away in autumn. Now, here's the mistake that undoes all of this, and it is the same mistake every time. Chasing the number. The hobbyist reads 84 degrees, decides the target is 78, and starts dumping frozen bottles and ice into the tank to force it down. And the tank swings 4 degrees in an hour and drifts back up by evening every day for a month. That is far more damaging than the warm water ever was. Fish tolerate a stable, elevated temperature remarkably well because their physiology adjusts to it over days. What they tolerate badly is rapid change, because every swing forces a metabolic readjustment, and each one carries a stress cost that accumulates. A tank sitting steadily at 82 degrees all summer with strong surface agitation is in a far better position than a tank oscillating between 78 and 84 every single day. The goal is not a number. The goal is a flat line and enough oxygen, and the fan gives you both because it works continuously and gently instead of in shocks. None of this is new physics, and none of it is a hack. Evaporative cooling is the oldest cooling technology our species has. Egyptian households cooled drinking water in porous clay jars that were designed to weep and evaporate. Persian engineers built wind catchers that pulled moving air across water channels to cool entire buildings in desert heat. Centuries before anyone wrote down the thermodynamics. Your own body runs the identical mechanism every time you sweat. And it is the reason a breeze feels cold on wet skin and merely pleasant on dry skin. It is the same principle at the same scale, doing the same job on the surface of your aquarium, and it has been available for the price of a desk fan the entire time the shelf has been offering you a machine. If you want the complete system rather than just the summer fix, the full aquarium playbook covers the whole seasonal protocol, the stocking and filtration decisions that determine how much heat your tank can absorb before anything goes wrong, and the warning signs that appear days before a fish is lost. It is all in one place, in the order you actually need it. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and you can scan the code on your screen to go straight to it. And if this changed how you think about the thermometer on your glass, give it a like and subscribe, because there is a great deal more where this came from.